This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Great episode on tap, man. You can tell NBA season is quickly coming upon us because we're trying to cover it all, man. And what better way for us to really start I felt like I was sleeping. I was in a dream. And then it dawned on me, or really Shaw probably whispered in my ear and said, bro, we need to start talking fantasy basketball. And I'm like, fantasy what? Fantasy basketball. And so, of course, we got a show that's going to cover fantasy basketball. Let me go around the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net. Big Kahuna. You see my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, ripping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, Mr. Shaw? Stop jumping in my dreams talking about fantasy basketball, this, that, and the third. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just weird.
Hey, we need to get you back on board, brother. I missed you in leagues, man. I miss you, man. But yeah, definitely an exciting time, and I get to talk with one of my colleagues, from another network. He reached out and has a great podcast that kind of covers this topic in general. But trust me, y'all, ladies and gentlemen, you're gonna enjoy the energy. You're gonna love this conversation we have coming up, man. So excited to get this episode popping, man. It's gonna be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a few moments, we will be sitting down and chopping it up with our man, Robbin Marx. He is the host of Bleav in Fantasy Basketball. His wealth of knowledge, his perspective, his passion for fantasy basketball is just really unmatched. And I think if you're someone who is new to the fantasy basketball space or even just curious about it, you do not want to miss this episode, because I'm telling you, he is not just going to reel you in. You're going to be out there, like I'm saying, catching like Atlantic salmon, baby. You're gonna be catching lobster by the time we're done with this episode. You will be so geeked up about wanting to get down with fantasy basketball, so you do not want to miss out on that. As always, be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Game Face Leader, show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. And you can also go to www.thebaselinenba.com to check out not just this episode, but also all of the episodes, the archive of episodes that my man Shaw and I have been able to roll out for your listening pleasure. And if you see us on the YouTube channels, you know that we rocks with the 19 Media Group family. Look for that blue and white logo. 19 Media Group, be running these content streets. So as always, be sure to go to www.19mediagroup.com to not only check us out, but also the family of great content creators that are producing for your listening pleasures as well. Coming up, we are getting ready to sit down and chop it up with our man, Robbin Marx, who will be talking about fantasy basketball. But first, are you ready to elevate your fantasy sports experience? With Prize Picks, you can win up to 100 times your money. Imagine turning a $10 entry into a whopping $1,000. With all the sports taking place right now, there's no better time to get in on the action. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week, from lowering your select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Football is back, and both women's basketball and baseball are marching toward the playoffs. Prize Picks is the best way to mix and match your selections across sports. Shaw and I grew up playing baseball, so we'd love to mix in a little variety with our picks from America's pastime. Pick players like Bobby Witt Jr., Asia Wilson, and Tyreek Hill, and you can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. And for those of you who love a quick win, Prize Picks is the way to go. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Plus, with quick withdrawals and an enormous selection of players and stat types, it's no wonder Prize Picks is the go-to app for fantasy sports. So what are you waiting for? Download the Prize Picks apps today and use promo code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's right, Prize Picks will match your deposit, giving you more to play with. Remember, with Prize Picks, it's as simple as picking more or picking less. So let's get those entries in. Watch the winnings roll. It's that easy. Don't forget to use the promo code CLNS to get your deposit match, and stay tuned for more basketball insights right here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Let's play and win together with Prize Picks. Coming up, Shaw and I break it down with our man, Robbin Marx, talking fantasy basketball. You don't want to miss out here on the Baseline. Time now for a little FaceTime with the Baseline, and we are definitely excited to have on board with us one of the premier minds who really covers the fantasy basketball landscape. It's not more than just about the game itself, man, but it's also about how you participate in your respective leagues. And we probably have no one better to help us kind of get us ready for this upcoming NBA season than our man, Robbin Daniel, aka Robbin Marx. He is the host of Bleav in Fantasy Basketball. And if you're not familiar with them, please go check them out. They are a great resource. They have great content conversation, not just in preview of the upcoming NBA season, but also throughout the NBA season. Robbin, thanks for hopping on board with us this week, brother.
Cal, I am so hyped. That might be the best intro that I've ever received to be a guest on the show. People typically just kind of throw me in. I love that I'm a premier mind. That has a really nice ring to it. So I appreciate
Work
that.
hard for it, man. You got to earn those kudos, man, especially when they come. But my man Sean knows of you. He knows your work. You listen to your work. We know you know what I'm saying, this is your happy place, as we say, man. Ain't nobody gonna get Happy Gilmore on our show better than you.
I love it. Nah, because I love that we have a podcast like yours that kind of bridges the gap between all facets of basketball. You know what I'm saying? I think that's the thing that really, encouraged me to just like shoot my shot to reach out to you guys. So I'm grateful to be here. I know that the podcast has been around for a while, and that's something, especially in this space, to have this level of consistency is just an inspiration for people like myself who are like, we've been doing our podcast for 3 years, but it's a grind, you know what I mean? And to see that you guys have been doing it for a while. The oldest episode that I saw was 2016, and it felt like you have more than that, maybe on other platforms that I couldn't find. So I just wanted to give you guys your flowers and tell you thank you for being so consistent and being a model of consistency for content creators.
Well, we certainly appreciate that. We ain't gonna let out the bag how far back we go, Mr. Shaw.
It's a minute.
But the smirk on his face probably says it all. You know what I'm saying?
Well, more than anything, we didn't get to the fact that Robbin has also been a TEDx speaker as well too. So I think all the stuff is coming out here, and you see why he's going to be an excellent guest for us here on the Baseline this week.
Absolutely. So, Robbin, let's get right into it, man. Like, I'm gonna be someone. I'm gonna get on the the psychiatric couch, man. I've been struggling with this desire to reinsert myself back into the fantasy basketball space, and I'm not gonna lie about that, because I can go as far back to in the beginning when my man Shaw and I, when we first started, really getting into doing basketball podcasts. We were trying to figure out a way, how can we kind of incorporate the things that we deal with on the daily level about our interest in basketball. And it just came about that with friends and, people that you usually vibe with, that you yell and scream when your favorite team is tanking and stuff like that. At the beginning stages of where fantasy basketball was, there was a momentum and there was enthusiasm. And I noticed since then it's elevated in so many different ways in different spaces. But maybe I'm just someone who's just, so old that I just don't pay attention to these things. I felt like maybe over the last few years, the momentum of fantasy basketball, specifically fantasy basketball, hasn't ingratiated itself the same way that it's ingratiated me some 10 years ago. And I was just curious, from your perspective, do you feel that that's the tenor, that's what the feel is like? Or do you see where the NBA is pivoting into a different position about how we want to embrace fantasy basketball and be able to incorporate that in our ability to appreciate and enjoy the games, the numbers, the statistics, and things of that nature?
Yep, I love that question. It's something for me being in the space that inspired me actually to even start this journey of creating content to supply resources, advice, and tips. But bigger than that, Cal, it's also to create awareness around the game. If you look at fantasy sports around the world, soccer is the biggest, cricket is one of the biggest, and then in America, the biggest, of course, is fantasy football. One of my missions is for NBA fans who play fantasy football, like many of us. I come from a fantasy football background. I started playing fantasy football first and was introduced into fantasy basketball. One of my missions is to welcome all NBA fans who play fantasy football to at least try out the fantasy basketball game. It's hard to compete with fantasy football because it's a very simple game. It's pretty easy, where sometimes the barriers that I see from newcomers to fantasy basketball is the complexity of the game. So for me, what I'm really on the hilltop about is, for new players especially, is to give it a try and maybe on an entry level start with points leagues. And I think points leagues really give people who are coming from the fantasy football game the easiest transition, because once we get into some of those more complex platforms or league types, I should say, like category leagues and roto leagues, people kind of get thrown off. They're like, what's happening? Like, what's the score? Who's winning? And I think having an easy transition, trying out a points league could help to create the awareness that I believe we need to do as NBA fans who play other fantasy sports, because I'm NBA first. You know what I'm saying? Like that, like I used to work at one of the largest YMCAs in the country, and I was proud that the YMCA created the game of basketball. That's where I started my career, like creating leagues for youth basketball, and it kind of progressed into where I am now, and having the platform to kind of just get as many people involved in the game as possible is one of my missions. So yes, we're not as popular as we once were, and we don't and I don't see the needle moving very fast, but there is a small group of fanatics who are trying to push that needle, and I'm there with them.
So, Robbin, let me jump in, because I think you've transitioned our point so eloquently, actually, because I'm like, I have a wage against football. I don't dislike football. I just hate that it's so much more popular. Like, the divide is so wide between that and basketball, but me being a basketball guy, of course. So you talked about the points league, because I think you're onto something there. My problem, though, is that other fantasy analysts, not you, but other fantasy analysts, almost kind of make fun of points leagues. And it's like, oh, well, like it's not real fantasy, or the case may be, but it's not allowing, and excuse me here, air quotes, the casuals, the opportunity to play, because I don't want to be there, like, know how many the field goal percentages and the 3-point percentage, like those things. I don't think those same nuances are there in fantasy football that they are in the way of fantasy basketball. But I'd say there's nobody gatekeeping fantasy basketball. Like, it's not that big of a political conversation. But I think if you're watching some analysts out there, they do kind of make fun of the points league angle. So is that something how can we as a basketball community embrace that a little bit more, as you're alluding to? Because I don't know if any other innovations are coming in fantasy other than that, but the points league might be the way that more fans can be, engaged in fantasy basketball from the outset.
Yep. That's good, Warren, because one of the reasons that I started my channel was because of this. I would feel like maybe, and not necessarily just the analysts. So some analysts do kind of look down upon points leagues, if you will, but also if you ever go to like a subreddit about fantasy basketball, it's almost like you are an outcast if you ask a freaking question about points leagues. It's like, what'd you say? You like, do you do what? Like, you play points? Like, pretentious bullcrap. I'm gonna keep it a stack. It irritated me so deeply. I would be like, dag, like, y'all really that pretentious, where it's like somebody can't ask a question about a digital sports game? Get over yourself, fam. So that's one of the reasons I created the channel, and I'll talk about innovations because I don't want to lose that point. But Warren, it was one of my missions to be like, hey, not only are points leagues okay, points leagues will be the vessel that grow the game. We can't start people off with trigonometry, yo. And you know what I'm saying? Like, there's checkers and there's chess. If you're really good at checkers and you don't know how to play chess, it's okay. Like, that whole like non-inclusive approach to a game, y'all, like a little video game. It irritated me. So for me, last season, I was very intentional about doing more category leagues, doing more roto content. I actually give a big shout out to Josh Lloyd, Dan Bespris, Zach Hanshu, some of the most prominent figures in the fantasy basketball space, doing collaborations with them to introduce more of that content to my audience. And then when I surveyed my audience and talked to them, they just want the points league content because nobody is just focusing on that. So again, it is a thing where people frown down upon it. They call you a casual if you play it. There's all of these tropes that are associated with, again, we just playing a freaking game, y'all. We're not out here. This is not like, we're not curing cancer. So for me, that's, Warren, one of my big missions in this space is to not just have people respect the Points platform, but also to push it so we get more people involved. And I just want to quickly talk about the innovations. So there is a platform called Sleeper that, again, is not getting the kind of respect from the fantasy community because they're trying something new, which is a more simple and easy league type. They have two league types. One is called Game Pick. One is called Lock-In Mode. And basically what it does, it tries to get as close to mimicking a fantasy football league model as possible, where league managers don't have to monitor as closely and they can just kind of make their decisions week to week or day to day. So there are platforms that are trying to innovate to create spaces that make it an easier transition into the game. And we'll see how it progresses over the years. But I know for us, when it comes to Bleav in Fantasy Basketball, we are all Points League all the time. And if people have a problem about it, they can email me info@BleavinFantasy.com.
Robbin coming with the, you know where to get at me.
For
Letting
real,
the chopper sing. We like 10 minutes in, the chopper's already singing.
Right?
When the Mac go ring, the thing. I'm just...
You know, Robbin, you bring up something. Shaw, I don't want to lose where we
no.
need to be traveling to next, but you brought up something that's very interesting to me because, again, like, you know, I'm sitting on the psychiatrist's couch a little bit here. I'm going to get into my Dr. Katz mode here a little bit. And I'm trying to psychoanalyze. I often say to myself, part of the problem that I think it existed, and because the NBA has always been good about being in the forefront when it comes to innovation and putting us in a different space about how technology and sports married together can help engage and, you know, kind of elevate fans, even on a global level, just not, you know, because of the popularity of the other sports, it always tends to get kind of swept underneath the rug. When fantasy basketball, I think, emerged, I never quite understood why the NBA didn't put more emphasis when the opportunities presented itself to build out the community rather than relying on the digital platforms to do that for them, like the Yahoos, the ESPNs, because clearly they're going to pivot to whoever is going to be yielding the most money. But to your point, if you have to go to Reddit, you know what I'm saying, to find somebody, to find a pulse, to find, you know what I'm saying, I feel like we're a displaced community of people who really do want to engage with everybody about what we feel and say and speak about when it comes to fantasy basketball. Am I off in that perspective of thinking? Because I feel like what you highlighted is exactly part of the frustrations for those who originally started to wanting to be a part of the whole fantasy basketball thing and have at some point just kind of like, you know, faded away, walked away from it, or have chosen to rely on, you know, the FanDuels, DraftKings, and things of that nature, just simply because we just don't have a place to call home with the sport that we enjoy wanting to implement something fantasy related.
Yep. So I do think the NBA can do a better job. I don't think it's been a priority. And a lot of it probably has to do with money. But one thing that I wanted to do with our platform. So I joined the Bleav network at the beginning of last season. So before that, I was independent, just kind of doing it on my own. Quick side note. My brother, when he passed away in 2021, before he passed, he talked about he wanted to start a gaming channel. So I was like, this guy's on his deathbed and he's like trying to start a gaming channel. That's crazy to me that it inspired me. So I went and secretly started this fantasy basketball channel that I always wanted to do. He never got to live to see it. But when I'm rocking, especially when there's like some humor involved, he's with me, right? So I share that because this started as a passion project. And when Bleav reached out to me, because many of Bleav's NBA shows are hosted by former players, I looked at it as an opportunity. Again, my mission, as written on this board, is to welcome 10,000 new fantasy basketball players this year. Like, that's one of my goals. what better way to do that than to get validation from the players? And even if it's not like, hey, CJ Watson, I think he does the Bulls show. It's not saying, CJ Watson, do you support fantasy basketball? It's more, hey, why don't we support it? Right. Do you know about it? Would you try it? And it's a work in progress. One of my dreams is to have some of the analysts who are former NBA players get into a league and like do content around, hey, like, you know, this guy drafted so-and-so, this guy drafted himself, like whatever it is. But I think that the NBA could do a better job. In terms of daily fantasy totally took the fantasy sports community by storm. So there is a deep divide because many people like fantasy because they can make money from fantasy, and that's dope. And I love that that's one of the reasons we're into it. Even if you have a small league prize, you know, that's important if you have some kind of motivation. I'm from the school of really like, I'm about my bragging rights. I'll take the money too, but I really want to be able to tell you for the whole year that I beat you. You know what I'm saying? Right. So I think that there's levels to it. And I think that having a like I know it looks like you guys are partners with Prize Picks. We have other platforms like Underdog where people are literally building empires around DFS, daily fantasy specifically. So I think there's a way for us to get creative, especially like if the NBA ever hears this, like just call me. we can work out an initiative because if you think about, for example, this is a good one. NBA Live, I'm sorry, 2K, right? NBA 2K. NBA 2K is a subculture of NBA. There are kids who don't want to watch the real game. They want to create their own world on NBA 2K. If we could have a similar kind of initiative around fantasy basketball, I believe it would help to not just grow the fantasy basketball game, but ultimately grow the NBA game.
I think those are amazing points, Robbin. You know, and I have somebody who's still playing in the fantasy space. I happen to play primarily in points leagues. I was introduced to Sleeper last year by some folks at my job. So, you know, I'm engaged in it, man. And I want to see people more and more involved. Like I said, Cal used to be in a league with me. That league, have seen a lot of our friends and fans like kind of come and go in terms of their, you know, their ability to want to stay in it, man. But I'd love to bring that thing back because I'm 1,000% with you. It ain't about the buck, bro. Like I like the bragging rights. I like the challenge of trying to construct a team. You're like a mini GM in that way. You know, you're obviously not operating with a salary cap. But again, you're trying to figure out what makes it work, you know, for the constructs of that league. So let's take it to aside of the philosophical side of the fantasy basketball conversation into a little bit what I think people are probably expecting when they tuned in here today. Yeah, but let's talk about some picks and some other things too. But we wanted to break it down. So one of the big questions that I have going into this year is truly the value of Wemby. Now, I know this has got to be a question that you're dealing with, you know, on a regular basis, right? So is he? I think he's clearly top 5, you know, but is he over guys, traditional guys like Giannis yet, so to speak? Is it still Jokic, Luka? Then you throw Wemby into that conversation. SGA, what are your thoughts on Wemby? And are you concerned or anything about San Antonio's management of him in year 2?
Yep. I'll start by saying that last season, before Wemby came into the league, I had a very hot take, and quite intentionally. And I do this quite often. When people zig, I zag. I'm like, if it's a guess and everybody's saying like, yes, I'm going to say no just because, right? So I jumped out the window, you know what I'm saying, on Wemby being a bust because of Pop being the godfather of load management, also his frame. You know, I don't know if he'll be durable enough for the NBA game. I had a whole episode about it. And
Pop is the leash master. Pop is the leash master. You know what I'm saying? Like, seriously. There were probably a couple of years, I'm sure you were sitting there saying, when are we going to unleash Kawhi? When are we going to unleash Kawhi? Like,
Yep. And that's the thing. So for me, in creating content, sometimes I will take radical positions just to start a conversation, right? And I'm always the first person, Warren, Cal, when I make a mistake, I'll raise my hand and say I made a mistake. And that didn't age well. I made a mistake. Moving us to this season, and I even knew this like a couple of months in the last season, Victor Webanyama is going to break fantasy basketball. He might break the league too. I think he has the potential, if healthy, to go down as one of the greats, maybe the greatest, if he can win some championships. But to fantasy basketball, I held on to Luka and Giannis, as well as the Joker, Nikola Jokic, in my top 3 for a while. And I kind of had Wemby on the outskirts. And as I've been developing content over this offseason, it's clear as day that this young man, in my opinion, should be the number 1 player going off of draft boards. If you want to pick Jokic, I would not be mad at that. I had Jokic as my number 1 for most of the offseason. I think I adjusted my rankings 2 weeks ago and moved Wemby to 1. And just, to give people context, especially if they haven't played the game before, Wemby last season averaged 24.1 points, 11.6 rebounds, 4.4 assists, 1.4 steals, and check this out, 3.9 blocks. So the point is that if you're playing in a points league, your statistical categories are weighted differently. So a point is like a point, but a block could be 4 points depending on what your league settings are. You know what I'm saying? So for me, that's the actual potential of what, if he improves, that is going to be crazy. So if you average in a little under 4 blocks a game, and imagine if he averages 4 blocks a game, he's going to give you 20 and 10 easy. So for me, I am all in on Wemby. And honestly, I'm sorry, the numbers that I just shared with you are actually projections, fantasy projections, not what he scored last year. So my apologies. Those numbers are what hashtag basketball are projecting that he's going to do this season. So if in fact he can kind of produce the defensive stats that he did last year and improve in any of those areas, is going to blow up fantasy basketball.
So isn't that, but I guess the question that I have for you then, Robbin, is that what would be the equivalence of who currently is in the NBA to produce similar type numbers? Is it LeBron? Is it Anthony Davis? Is it really Jokic? Is it really Giannis? Right? Like, if I'm someone who's coming in knowing I don't have that first pick, but I got to find an equalizer, right? Some people may have to go through 2-3 rounds for them to be able to equate what I think you're saying the projections are going to be for Wemby. Where do I go from there? Right? Like, where does my pivot then become? I always come into my situation, and Sean knows about this. This is why we enjoyed when we first did our fantasy basketball leagues respectively, is we always came up knowing that there's going to be a plan B, plan C. Because the moment that you start hedging your bets thinking you're going to get that first pick, it's a wrap. So how do you pivot to a plan B knowing that this is the projections of what a Wemby might actually give you for this upcoming season?
And let me color it just a little bit, because like in leagues like ours, Wemby's like a player and a half. So he's not just, he counts for like 60 fantasy points, where most guys might average 40, like a good player averages like 40, 42. So it's like, that's, I think that's what Kyle's alluding to. How do you account for that if you don't end up with one of those top tier guys?
Yep. So I've been looking at that top tier as Wemby, Jokic, Luka. If you get any of those 3, you're good. If you got the first pick and you choose Luka or Jokic, I wouldn't be mad at you. So those are opportunities for people who are in the top 3. Then the next tier for me is kind of the SGAs of the world. So Shai Gilgeous-Alexander can dish so many assists, put up the buckets that will kind of be able to compete with those top 3 players, but will still be kind of a tier below. Then guys like Anthony Davis, I think, are in that same tier with SGA, where we always looked at Anthony Davis in fantasy basketball as an injury-prone player that won't be there when you really need him, although he does produce when he's healthy. Last season, he was healthy. And, and people are injury prone until they're not injury prone. So for me, Anthony Davis definitely brings some of the same contributions as a Victor Webanyama because of his defensive prowess. You know what I mean? So I know, like, he's not Wemby. There's only one, and there's maybe only two other people that can be in that conversation with the top 3 players in fantasy basketball. However, I think once you fill out the rest of your roster, that's where you kind of balance things out. I always tell people, your season will not be won at the draft. Your season will be won based on your in-season management. Who's getting injured? Who are you picking up on that team who's now sliding into a new role? Players like Jaylen Johnson, for example, from the Atlanta Hawks. Last season, he was not on anybody's radar, really, and he came out of nowhere. The people who grabbed Jaylen Johnson, who, you know, got him off of the waiver wire for free, right, are the people who kind of had that extra advantage. So even if you don't get Wemby, your in-season roster management can definitely lead you to a championship.
My man Robbin Marx joining us here on the Baseline, host of Bleav in Fantasy Basketball. Be sure to check out his show. Be sure to check him out on the Bleav Network. Coming up, Sean and I will dig in with our man Robbin and where, you know what I'm saying, it may come easy for him because, you know, he's a fantasy basketball king, but I'm sure that he's going to want to make sure that he crowns people properly with the right insight and information with this upcoming season, which a lot of people are saying do not sleep on it, because it definitely is going to make for some not just interesting television to watch, but some interesting point building to be had. So you don't want to miss out on this here at the Baseline.
It's been an active and warm summer. Finding time to cook a healthy meal is no small task. The Baseline encourages you to save time and fuel up with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals thanks to a menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine. From breakfast to dessert, stay fueled with easy, nutritious options. Factor has 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, giving you new flavors to explore. Head to factormeals.com/baseline50 and use code baseline50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off the next month. That's code baseline50 at factormeals.com/baseline50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while the subscription is active.
We're back. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast, doing a little FaceTime with the Baseline with our man Robbin, handling Bleav in Fantasy Basketball. Shaw, I'm gonna pass the baton on to you, my friend, because I know that you know what I'm saying, you're licking your chops on some of the info we've already gotten on the first segment of this show.
Yeah, this episode might be a little self-indulgent, but
exactly. This has nothing to do with the fans, but more about what you're trying to do for your upcoming fantasy basketball league.
So, but Robbin, we have a segment on our regular show that's called Hoops Redemption, that we go into the regular season. It's like, all right, you know what? Who's it's not necessarily like who's going to be comeback player of the year type of situation or most improved or like that. It's just like, hey, you know what? Who was down a little bit that we expect to kind of regain that. So let's flip that on its head for the purposes of the show. And who are some guys that you're looking at for fantasy hoops redemption? And I'll throw out guys like Dame Lillard. Can Jordan Poole even have a fantasy hoops redemption? Because he was god awful last year. Ja Morant, I think, is an obvious one as well too. Some guys that come to mind for you that when it comes to fantasy hoops redemption.
That's a great question. I love this segment or this or the idea of flipping this segment into the fantasy basketball world. The first person that just comes to mind, besides the names that you shared are really good, is LaMelo Ball. And LaMelo is somebody who in the last few years in fantasy basketball was a first-round player. People were drafting him middle, late, first round. He was off the board. He's had injury concerns, the ankles, right? And I tell people all the time, if you remember when Steph first came into the league, Steph had weak ankles. Steph was like always out with an ankle injury, and people had concerns. Would he ever really be anything? And now many would say he's one of the top 10 players in NBA history, right? So for LaMelo Ball, I think he has that kind of potential to be a monster for fantasy basketball. And he's right now going in the second round in many of the mock drafts that I'm conducting, which I believe is a steal, especially for points league. So for me, I wouldn't reach too far for him. I wouldn't like go like if you got the 6th pick, like I'm gonna just do it. I'm gonna take LaMelo. Like I would be a little patient, pay attention to what's happening in the draft room. But he's definitely someone I would circle in terms of having a bounce back, especially where his value is this year. Another player that I'm looking at in terms of bounce back value would definitely be somebody like James Harden. So James Harden, for years, especially in his Houston years, was one of the most elite fantasy basketball players. Like dishing out 12 assists, scoring 30 points. It was like, amazing arcade level production. And recently in the last few years, especially since, moving from Houston, landing in Brooklyn, landing in Philly, landing in LA, like it seemed like everywhere he went, his like value decreased a little bit, especially when you think about optics as a fantasy basketball community. Even though he had a pretty good year last year, it wasn't anywhere near his normal top 10 production. However, we've had a shakeup in LA with the departure of Paul George, aka Podcast PG-13, leaving town. That's going to open up a ton of opportunity for just general usage, but also scoring. Like somebody got to score the ball, right? But it doesn't stop there. They also lost Russell Westbrook. So Russell Westbrook leaving town, even though towards the end he was coming off of the bench, he's still, somebody has to account for his production. And then 2 more pieces to that LA Clippers puzzle. The fact that Kawhi Leonard habitually, consistently is out. Last year, he played more games than usual. I'll give him that. However, in the fantasy basketball world, when it came to the playoffs, fantasy playoffs specifically, he ain't play. He wasn't there. If your fantasy basketball playoffs were like going according to most standard leagues, you didn't have Kawhi Leonard when you needed him the most. With that said, if Kawhi comes back with the hamstring or whatever it is, then James Harden might have to bust out the Frohawk. He might have to take it back to Houston, James Harden. And the last thing about the Clippers is that they're moving into their new arena. So what better way? And that is not an analytical take. That is just an emotional take. New home, new building. You get to like christen the building. If he came into the arena with the Frohawk, I would flip my lid. So I'm looking at James Harden, maybe even moving up into top 15 territory, hopefully this season.
I wanna stay on Shaw's hoop redemption real quick, but I want to add a little nuance to this. I want to do a little buy or sell with you, okay? Because I'm really intrigued about where a lot of new faces in old faces in new places are turning up, and where they may land, say, on your not just draft board, but just in general, the appetite for having them on your squad, right? So one person that comes to mind is a Klay Thompson, right? Which he's not top tier. We've been talking about top tier players, but there's a value that's clearly added in points leagues when your guy can give you like 3-4 3-pointers per game and is a starting shooting guard or maybe small forward, and a guy like Klay Thompson. So I want to do a little buy or sell with a guy like him. Do you buy into him, redeeming, probably getting a little bit back of, of what's lost? Or are you selling on the ideas like, listen, even if he's in Dallas and he's playing against, playing next to Luka and a Kyrie, who I'm sure can distribute the ball to him, he is not as the main primary person that everyone may think that he needs to be for fantasy purposes, that you can probably find for other people in later rounds.
Yep. I think where you're getting Klay now, I would be interested in like a soft buy. I'm not like I would do a soft buy on Klay. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Goose feather
like
sauce?
really, like a triple fat goose, right? Like I'm not all the way in. Me personally, I would probably pick someone else in those rounds, right? But I always believe that when you give, and this is not just for basketball, this is for life, right? When you give people a change of work environment, scenario, sometimes people produce at a higher level. And I know that with a Luka and a Kyrie, that he's gonna have kind of freedom to roam and find his spots and get his shots, right? So for me, I think there's room for opportunity there, especially where you're getting him in the later rounds. I would take a flyer on it, but me personally, I'm not all in. I'm gonna say triple fat goose feather soft buy on Klay Thompson.
Okay, you got more cow in your buy or sell.
All right. Well, let me flip it on the other side of it, right?
Uh-huh.
We're talking Klay Thompson.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What about, say, a Jaylen Brown or a Jayson Tatum, right? Like everybody is saying, you know, these guys can go up, right? Considering what they've just accomplished and achieved. Do they move themselves up there where you're a hard buy on them? Or do you say, you know what, this is the same thing that you got to be careful with? It's like, it seems real nice, you know what I'm saying, in the window, that you want to go ahead and purchase that, put that Tiffany money down for, but there's still those limitations that you probably still like. It's not going to happen in the way that you want it to happen in from fantasy perspective. Like, it would have to be that these guys individually have to be on different teams if you're trying to maximize what you're getting out of from a fantasy. So are you buying more on a Jaylen Brown, or are you selling on a Jaylen Brown, you know, as far as the projections that he's going to even be better than what he gave us last year?
Yep. I would probably buy on Jaylen Brown. I think that, and it all really has to do with value, like where you're getting him and where he's going in drafts right now. It's fair. I think for Tatum, I'm a little more reluctant on drafting him because people view Jayson Tatum as, you know, like a first round fantasy basketball players in points leagues. And honestly, I feel like there's not a decline in talent. He's one of the most talented young players we have in the league. And now
consistency. I think it's a matter of consistency in that he's consistently inconsistent. He has great, you know, runs, and then he falls off the table for a good portion of time, and then he comes back and has great runs again. And maybe that's because he's afforded the opportunity of playing next to a guy like Jaylen Brown, who's literally like his doppelganger, essentially.
Yep. And I think, you know, KP, Kristaps Porzingis is going to be out for the early part of the season. But I think last season that impacted Tatum's numbers, having another like force on the team, really. When KP was healthy, it impacted his stats. So in real basketball, it works because they got a championship. And sometimes in those scenarios, stars have to sacrifice a little bit of their statistical value for the greater good of the team. And I'm seeing that with Tatum. So for me, I'm not really trying to draft Jayson Tatum in the first round. There are other players that I'll be looking at, but where Brown is going, I'm buying in. So I guess I'm selling on Tatum, buying on Brown.
So let's stick in the veteran mode here real quick, as you're talking about tempering expectations. So, and we do got to get to the things that, because right now we're kind of on that first and second round, third round, kind of like we need to get to like middle round and sleeper stuff. But I do have one more question about a high level guy, and that's Joel Embiid. You know, so at this stage, most leagues are what, 10 to 12 teams, you know, give or take or whatever. Could you see Embiid slipping to a second round this year? I mean, that might just be pick 13, but based on the injury history, the addition of Paul George, you just talked about Tatum having to take a step back with Porzingis being there. Embiid is clearly an alpha, but are you concerned about Embiid in any capacity? And would you draft him maybe even a couple slots later than you were in years past?
Yep. I'll start by saying that I love Joel Embiid. I love him for fantasy. I have him. I play in some dynasty leagues. And for my folks who are new to fantasy, dynasty leagues are pretty much leagues that go forever. So you draft a team, and then in the summer, you're trading with your friends. It's like one of my favorite ways to play fantasy. So I have Joel in a couple of my teams, and it's been hard. You know, it's been hard. And I would say this, that I try to monitor more than what's happening on the stats and with the analytics. So on paper, he only played a few games last year. I want to say like he missed a bunch of games last year. I don't know the exact number, but a bunch of games. But his per game production was the top for points leagues. Like he produced for the games he played, right? But he ain't play. So for me, watching him in the Olympics, he looked off, y'all. He looked like he was almost like hobbling sometimes. You know what I'm saying? I was like, yo, what's up with Joel? Joel is like just not moving like himself. Maybe he'll come back healthy. And if healthy, I would definitely take him in the first round, right? But the fact that he's coming off of this last season where he didn't play a bunch, and historically, this is not a new thing. Historically, Joel Embiid gets injured. Now, if people have hamstring injuries and then they have a wrist injury, that's different. He always has these lower body knee injuries. Like I believe on the last injury, he did the shortcut meniscus thing to come back. So it's like he's a big guy with knee problems. So for me, I am selling. I am out on Joel Embiid this season. Will he go in the second round? I'm seeing him go in the first round in mock drafts right now. So I believe people will look at Joel falling to the 10th position in a points league as a value. For me, if there's the 10th position, I'm looking at other players. I'm looking at Tyrese Halliburton, Trae Young if he's around, Domantas Sabonis if he's around, even LeBron James. I would take LeBron James before I take Joel Embiid, just because I believe that the health concerns it's too big of a risk and too much to pay in the first round.
Wow. That was a hot take.
Yeah, and it breaks my heart too. It breaks my heart, because I have him in so many places. Right. But like,
but it's a good hot take. It's a good hot take because I think this becomes, again, what is your prioritization with how you're structuring and building your team? Do you sacrifice, trying to go, for broke on a high risk, high reward type of player? And I think at some point, Robbin, hopefully we'll be able to get you back on again, because I want to start labeling players, but I do think that when you're talking about fantasy, by being able to put a label on what that player means in its community, in the grand spectrum when it comes to fantasy basketball, it helps you better strategize about your approach, right? Like, you can't just go in on the idea that Joel Embiid is kind of like that guy, because we just finished having a conversation and you just mentioned it a few moments ago, a guy like Kristaps Porzingis, where from a numbers perspective, minus the fact that Joel Embiid obviously scores more, but listen, if Kristaps Porzingis had as many touches as Joel Embiid, he probably would be doing the same thing. And Kristaps shoots the three a lot better than Joel Embiid. But to me, it's about the strategy, right? It's about how you strategize. So I guess, like, if anything, for you, who from the point guard position really has an opportunity to elevate themselves to that next, like, who is your sleeper from a point guard position that gives you that good balance of points, assists, steals, ability to shoot the three? Who is it that we should be putting on the radar that people are not talking about? They should probably be talking about, especially when we get closer to that draft night time.
Yep. A couple of people that just come to mind quickly: Brandon Podziemski from the Golden State Warriors. So Brandon Podziemski will be a second-year player, and he had a decent fantasy season last year when given the opportunity to get on the floor. And I think that the Warriors look different now. You know what I'm saying? So I think a combo guard, a guy who can play the 2-or-1, but also the fact that he showed that when he got the playing time last season that he put up some numbers. That's somebody that I would be looking at. I think he's going in like the 10th or the 11th round right now, but definitely somebody I'm taking a look at. Another one is, especially in points leagues, is Cam Thomas from the Brooklyn Nets. So you won't get the assists that you want, but he is a microwave, right? Like, we know that Cam Thomas, when he gets going, he can pour in some buckets. Inconsistency has been a thing with him, but I believe that if we have big games from him, they're 40-point games. Like, Cam Thomas, there's
no Mikal Bridges, right? And one of my big things, and I've told Shaw about this as well, is like, look, New York Knicks probably have lucked out getting a guy like Mikal Bridges probably to really solidify that team defensively. But he's a volume shooter. He requires a ton of touches. It'll be interesting to see how all that plays itself out. I was meaning to ask you, you didn't mention Jalen Brunson and where he might be in the grand scheme of this. But listen, Jalen Brunson is a team guy, and he'll sacrifice maybe his shots to make sure that he gets his guys going before he gets going, because he's confident he can do it. But, to your point, Cam Thomas, I mean, that what do they got over there in Brooklyn that's going to stop him from jacking up shots?
Really? You know what I'm saying? So I think for a points league, definitely somebody you want to look at in those middle rounds. And then the last two guys I'll talk about in terms of sleepers are some rookies that I'm trying to put in my queue towards the back of drafts. Some you might need to reach a little more for, but the first one is Reed Shepherd. I think Reed Shepherd, just watching him in summer league, he looks real. There is a lot of congestion in the backcourt on the roster for the Houston Rockets. So there are a lot of mouths to feed. But one thing about Ime Udoka that I've witnessed over the years is that if guys produce, he don't care if you're a rookie, a second year, a 10-year vet, you're going to get minutes if you're producing. And if you're not producing, you're going to sit. So I think if Reed Shepherd can have a run of a few good games, he could get into a starting position by the middle of the year. I don't think he'll start the season like that, but I do think in those later rounds, he's somebody that I want to put in my queue. I wouldn't wait too long for him. He's not going to be your last pick. You want to look at him maybe like in the 12th, 13th round. I would just reach and grab him to secure him. And then the last guy I'll talk about is one of my favorite rookies, Rob Dillingham. This is a kid that he is out of this world. I have a 14-year-old who plays, basketball for his high school team, and he's doing the all of the leagues and stuff. And he's been following Rob since Rob was in like middle school. So this is the first time. And we're from the old school. Like we knew about Kobe like right when he was about to go into the league, right? But we wasn't following Kobe in middle school because of the internet, because of social media. These players are building their personal brands at a very young age. The difference with Rob Dillingham is that he's delivered on every level that he's played on, whether it was him coming to OTE and being that microwave type of point guard that could put up buckets and give you highlights, or going to Kentucky for 1 year and coming off of the bench and putting up good numbers and then becoming ultimately a lottery pick. So for me, the role in Minnesota is perfect for him, because if he came off the bench to Mike Conley, and they gave him that 6-man role, I promise you, he is going to make it rain, yo. The kid is unbelievable. That's one of the players. I'm telling you, put him in your queue, grab yourself some Rob Dillingham.
Yeah, I love that take. Honestly, my 19-year-old was talking to me about Rob, on draft night, was wondering where he went, et cetera, et cetera. So that's proof positive. We're living, similar lives here. And I was surprised the Spurs, with all their offensive goals, traded that pick.
It's a good year to be a Minnesotian, man.
Yeah, but San Antonio making that move doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. The Spurs definitely could have utilized that offense, and where they're going and build them alongside Wemby. But that's more on the actual analysis side. As opposed to
you don't hear Rob saying nothing, because he knows he's plotting. He's like, yo, keep him away from Pop. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, big fact.
Yeah, I think it's a better look. I think it's a better look for his future too, right? And don't get me wrong, like playing for the Spurs would have been great for him. Playing alongside Wemby would have been great. But these guys are actually they're knocking on the door of Minnesota. They're in win now mode. So I'm really excited for him, but also the fact that there might be a 6-man role available for him. So we'll see what happens, but I'm queuing him up in every draft that I'm in this season.
Well, Robin, we obviously could talk all day. I'm going to kind of close out here. I have a lot of individual questions I've got kind of running through my head. I'm like, Kobe White's my guy in Chicago. Giddy's there now. What do I do? Et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going to close with this one. Who are guys who you are absolutely staying away from no matter what? And I'll give you some context for me, because listen, Ben Simmons is like a 4-letter word in the fantasy community right now, right? And I've just been like, okay, it can't be that bad. If I see him in the last pick, well, that's not a guy I'm actually going to put him. If he does anything, then hey, I made out, right? If he's my last pick, but I've been burned twice. I've dropped him 12th and 13th. The last 2 years, and he just doesn't play. So I'm done. I'm washing my hands of the whole Ben Simmons thing altogether. Who are your must avoids this year in fantasy basketball?
Ben freaking Simmons. I'm Warren, we are brothers from another. And I tell you, I did the same thing, man. I was like, man, if I could get him at the 12th or 13th round, and he produces
the only reason why Ben Simmons even has a pulse in the NBA at this point. Okay. He's been blackballed literally in everything, but fantasy leaguers,
It's
Bleav.
intoxicating, though. It's intoxicating. You think the last pick, you can maybe squeeze something out of that, but
This is what happens when you watch. Listen, Ocean's 11 is my favorite, like one of my favorite movies of all time. This is what happens when you're trying to take the house, and the house is trying to take you.
My bad, Robin. Finish your thought.
No, I did the same thing. I drafted him at the back end of my drafts the last couple of years. Just like, yeah, if he was 60% of who he was, but I'm staying so far away from him. Another player I'm staying away from is a player that I love. One of the most, he gives me the 90s feel, hard-nosed player, all about winning, Jimmy Butler. I love Jimmy Butler as a player, but for fantasy, I can't deal with Jimmy needing to take days off to sell $100 coffee. He got to go to get his hair done. Like I'm out on him.
Neo Jimmy.
Yeah, I'm out on Jimmy for fantasy. Again, one of my favorite players. If I was picking a playoff team or a finals team, I would want him to be my 2 or my 3. But like for fantasy, again, a person that's burned me. Like some nights he don't play, it's resting, whatever. I'm out on him. And then I'll give you one more, and this one might be a hot take, but Kawhi Leonard. I just can't. I just can't. Again, when he's on the floor, he produces, and that is undeniable. But he don't play. He don't play. It's like it's always something. And again, I would never be mad at a player for being injured, right? And I never wish injuries on people. So that's 2 big things just morally. I would never be like, oh man, your ankle sprain, forget you. Like, nah. But if I'm building my team and I'm looking at the history of a player and their availability and the games played, I'm factoring that in. And some of this, and I'll state this for the whole community, especially if you're new to fantasy, it's okay to step away from the statistics and follow your gut. And that's something that we don't talk about enough in the space because it's such an analytical, mathematical, like projection-based kind of, space where it's like, if you don't know numbers, you're gonna falter. It's like, nah, I just believe in my heart that I'm not banging with Kawhi Leonard this season. And take it or leave it. Sometimes you got to do that.
Damn, that's it. One last one, Robin. I want to ask you, Chris Middleton.
Mm-hmm.
Is he someone that you keep close to the hip, or you put the hex on and be like, nah, I'm good?
I think because the investment on Chris Middleton is a lot lower than a player like Kawhi Leonard. If you want Kawhi Leonard, you're going to have to take him in the 2nd, 3rd round. Like people like treat him like he's still Kawhi, right? Mm-hmm. And he could produce if he's healthy. A person like Chris Middleton is the flip side of that, where people don't believe in Chris Middleton right now. Chris Middleton's name is like, oh, is he still in the NBA? Like he's playing? Okay, is he healthy? Like what? So I think that where he's going in drafts right now, it is value. So I'd be okay with Chris Middleton. And he's honestly somebody that I will be looking at as well in some of those middle and later rounds.
Robin, man, this is gonna have to be a multi-part series. We're gonna have to do, bro.
Let's do it, man.
Like what I love about this is, like, to your point, Shaw, there's just so many things that can be asked of, especially just from a fantasy perspective, that I just think are so insightful, and in ways they kind of help cross together with what we typically see or what we look for when we're watching these guys go out and perform. Robin, man, it's awesome to be able to finally get you onto the show. Really helping to lay the groundwork down. I don't know about you, Shaw. I'm ready to get rocking. Let's go. When we getting this fantasy league thing going? Let's
there it is. Yeah, there it is. Well,
that's all it is. All it took was Robin. Damn it, to hell with Batman. We just needed Robin.
Well, Robin is my label mate here on the Bleav network. But obviously here on the 19 Media Group network, we might be organizing some things on the basketball side, but we can definitely get it all popping. And Robin, you are welcome to join regardless of how it goes, or invite us to whatever you have going on as well too. And I think this is giving us some impetus maybe for at least maybe a monthly segment or something like that too. We check in with you, something quarterly. Check in with Robbin Marx here, from the Bleav in Fantasy Basketball, man. It's great stuff, Robin. Tell the people where they can find you, what you have going on here as the season kind of unfolds.
Yep. Thank you so much, fellas. And again, I'm super honored to be here on the platform. I see what you guys are doing. That consistency piece is huge when it comes to creators, especially seeing two Black men talking about basketball for however many years you've been doing it and giving folks like myself another platform to share my knowledge and expertise. I'm just grateful. If folks want to connect with me, the easiest way you can do it is just go to BleavInFantasy.com. That's BLEAV in fantasy.com. There you'll go to a landing page where you can join my email list, but also get access to my free Discord community of over 2,000 fantasy basketball fanatics, where I'll give you early access to my videos, episodes, but also a place where people can just help to answer those questions. On social media, you can find me at Bleav in Fantasy.
Robbin, man, once again, we'd like to thank you for jumping on, doing a little FaceTime with the Baseline for us, man. It certainly will not be the last time. And it's just been, again, a pleasure for you to share your wealth of knowledge and enthusiasm in the fantasy basketball community for this upcoming season, man. Let's get rocking and rolling, brother.
Thank you so much, fellas.
All right. You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. What an episode, Shaw. I mean, it is just awesome. The opportunities when they present themselves to be able to bring great people on board and people who are passionate about what they love to discuss, and no better person, man, than our man Robbin, who clearly has his finger on the pulse of things going on with fantasy basketball. I just thought it was just awesome to be able to like really cover that gamut, man. It was just great content, especially for someone like myself who's been, really down on the idea about wanting to do fantasy basketball. You've known, we've spoken personally about my, apprehension to doing it because of, bad experiences in the past and stuff. But like when you talk with someone like Robbin, he kind of, reinvigorates the prospects about wanting to do it and the enthusiasm about getting down with it again.
Yeah, man. It's like I told you off air, I said, hey, he's going to come with the energy, and that passion was evident. So I'm excited to start my fantasy basketball season. I need a little hoops redemption on my side. I had one of the worst fantasy basketball seasons I've ever had. I'm not ashamed to say, because I've had some successes, but last year I finished 7th, 8th, and 8th. I've never been that bad. So, I got a lot of work to do, and I need to listen to Robbin a little bit more, apparently, to get my proverbial act in order. So I'm excited for it, man. But he was an amazing guest, and I look forward to working with that brother down the line too, man. Great stuff from Robbin Marx.
Absolutely. And once again, man, we want to make sure people know, if you want to get your fantasy basketball intake, be sure to go to Bleav in Fantasy Basketball, BLEAV in Fantasy Basketball. Man, Robbin Marx, man, he hosts the show. Again, great content, great show covering fantasy basketball. And listen, we're only about a month away, essentially, before you have to really start, being serious about it. Obviously, those of you who are new to the fantasy basketball leagues, start now. Start looking at, the prospects of leagues you might be interested in. Reach out to people and stuff like that. Do your due diligence. But trust me when I tell you, if you've got someone like a Robbin Marx on your team or commissioning your league and stuff, I have no doubt you will have probably one of the best times of your life when it comes to participating in fantasy basketball. Once again, we'd like to thank you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. And again, we'd like to thank our host, Robbin Marx, host of Bleav in Fantasy Basketball. For the Baseline, Callie Warren Shaw. We appreciate you guys. We do. And we'll catch up with you next time.